Good evening, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us on this rather cold and wet January evening. This is going to be a really great webinar on a super important topic. For those of you who've never joined our webinar program before, then hello and welcome. My name is Rahini Bajekal. I'm a nutritionist and board certified lifestyle medicine professional and the lead for these webinars. So we're going to shortly be joined by Anita Bean, who really needs no introduction. She has been on our webinar program a couple of times, and you can go and check out those recordings on YouTube or in our members area. She's a registered nutritionist and author and is going to be discussing how to fuel performance for active older adults. But before we get started, I just want to draw your attention to our next webinar, which is going to be in February. And it's with Dr. Deepa Sanidhi. And this is, again, a really topical webinar all about GLP-1s and specifically lifestyle medicine treatment for obesity and in the era of obesity treatment, and specifically GLP-1s like Ozempic, Wegovy, and so on. So this is going to be a really great one. Dr. Sanidhi is based in the USA, and she is an expert in this topic. So if you want to learn more about how lifestyle can fit in with obesity management, then please do invite your friends, family, colleagues, and so on. And lastly, a reminder to go and check out some of the episodes on In a Nutshell. It's a fantastic podcast hosted by GPs Claire and Daisy and covering every topic relating to plant-based nutrition, lifestyle medicine, loads of short bite-sized episodes as well. So it's on all podcast apps. Definitely go and have a look at that. It's great for dog walks or commutes. And I'd also like to thank the CPD certification service for providing us with CPD accreditation. If this webinar is CPD accredited, you will receive a certificate in your inbox in about 3 weeks' time. The American College of Lifestyle Medicine also provides us with CME accreditation. Plant-Based Health Professionals UK is a community interest group dedicated to promoting the benefits of a whole food plant-based diet for human and planetary health. You could join us as a member from as little as £15 a year for students or £25 a year for general membership. So it's a real steal, and that every single penny goes towards our advocacy work. We also have members only Facebook and WhatsApp communities. We have online and in-person networking events, including a wonderful flagship conference where you get discounts if you're a member, and listings in our Speakers Bureau and Health Professionals Directory. And every single month, we have things like journal clubs and online book clubs so that you can join from anywhere in the world. You don't need to be a health professional to join, and you don't need to be in the UK. You can also donate if you wish to via pbhp.uk/donate and follow us on social media on Facebook, Instagram, and LinkedIn. And now I'd like to welcome Anita Bean. As I said, Anita really needs no introduction. She's authored so many incredible books. She's a registered nutritionist. She's also been the official nutritionist for the London Marathon, which she's going to share a bit more about her background. And she's going to join us back here for a live Q&A. So please do pop any burning questions for Anita in the Q&A function at the bottom so that I can put them to her after the presentation. Best of luck, Anita, and thanks so much for joining us again.
Thank you very much. So if you just give me a second just to start sharing slides, that sort of thing. Okay. Okay, can you see me okay, right? If you just give me the thumbs up or...
Great. Looks great.
All right, fantastic. Thank you. All right, let me just get rid of this. Okay, so, well, hello, first of all, I'm Anita Bean. I'm registered nutritionist. I specialise in sport and exercise nutrition. So I qualified as a nutritionist back in 1984. Then I started my career, first of all, in the NHS and the Dairy Council. Then I set up my own consultancy in the early 90s. But I've always had a real passion for sports and strength training in particular, which led me into sports nutrition writing. And my first book was The Complete Guide to Sports Nutrition, first came out in 1993. So since then, I have written 30 books, and I've worked for many years as a freelance health journalist, for all sorts of magazines, but the main ones at the moment are Good Housekeeping, Cycling Weekly, and Waitrose Food. But I've worked with lots of athletes and organisations, including the British Olympic Association, London Marathon. But importantly, I've been a vegetarian all my life, and earlier in my career, I competed in bodybuilding, winning the British Championships in 1991. So, yes, you can absolutely build muscle without meat. But anyway, nowadays, I still train every day, and I am passionate about helping people stay strong, active, and healthy on a plant-based diet throughout their life, which is exactly what today's talk is all about. So today we're talking about fueling performance as we get older, and specifically how nutrition and training can help us stay strong and active. So many people assume that muscle loss, weight gain, and slow metabolism are just an inevitable part of getting older. But the evidence tells us something very different. Aging doesn't automatically mean decline, especially if we stay active and we fuel our bodies properly. And that's what I want to focus on today. So here's what I'll cover in this session. So first, we'll look at how aging affects performance and body composition if we don't intervene. Then we'll talk about protein needs in active older adults and whether vegan diets can really support muscle building. And then finally, we'll look at supplements that may be worth considering, particularly in the context of aging and resistance training. So the good news is that more older adults are staying active. So this data from Sport England shows that over 60% of adults aged 55 to 74 are achieving at least 150 minutes of activity per week, the recommended amount. And even in the 75 plus age group, 43% are active, and that's increased quite substantially since 2015. So we're no longer talking about a small niche of exceptional older adults. We're talking about a large and growing population of older adults who want to stay fit and strong and capable. And they need nutrition advice that actually supports that goal. So if we don't stay active, aging has very predictable effects on the body. So from midlife onwards, we naturally lose muscle mass at a rate of around 3 to 8% per decade. And over a lifetime, that can add up to a loss of 30 to 40%. About a third of your muscle mass can be lost. Now, strength declines too, especially after the age of 50. And cardiorespiratory fitness, that also drops steadily at about 10% per decade after our mid-20s. And then bone mass begins to decline for our mid-30s, with 1 in 3 women over 50 experiencing a fracture related to osteoporosis. So these changes aren't subtle, but they have real consequences for mobility and independence. So this age-related loss of muscle and strength that we've just mentioned, it's got a name, it's called sarcopenia. So sarcopenia reduces mobility, it lowers the quality of life and makes everyday activities, like climbing stairs or carrying shopping much harder. It also significantly increases the risk of falls and fractures. But the really important point, though, is that sarcopenia is not inevitable and we can slow it down. And in many cases, actually prevent it with regular strength training and the right nutrition. So that's really what today's talk is all about, really focuses on that. So these graphs show what happens to muscles, at least the muscle cross-sectional area, as we age. So you can see a clear downward trend, especially in the type 2 fibers that are responsible for strength and power. So that's the right-hand graph in front of you. So this is why people may feel weaker or less stable as they get older, but even if their body weight hasn't changed very much. And these MRI images make the changes even clearer. So on the left is a young adult with a high proportion of lean muscle tissue. In the middle, you'll see an older adult with much higher fat infiltration and far less muscle. But the image on the right, this is crucial. It shows an older adult who remains physically active and the muscle mass is dramatically better preserved. So in other words, age alone is not a determining factor. What really matters is your physical activity. Now, so why does muscle decline with age? Well, there are a few key reasons, and a major one is reduced activity, particularly a lack of strength and power training. Poor nutrition also plays a role, especially inadequate protein intakes. And on top of that, hormone levels decline with age. So, in particular, growth hormone, testosterone, estrogen, and clearly menopause time for women, estrogen takes an absolute nosedive and it plummets really, really quickly. And that's responsible for many of the body comp changes and performance changes that occur post menopause. But on top of that, we've got chronic low grade inflammation, and this gradually breaks down muscle tissue. And you'll notice the quite busy looking graphic on the right, which I have credited below it. You'll see that really sarcopenia, it reflects interactions between inflammation, between immune aging, and also reduced muscle signaling. The muscles are less able to send out these myokines, these signals. But the key point is that many of these factors are modifiable. So as we get older, we develop something called anabolic resistance. So this means that the signals that normally stimulate muscle growth, so from protein intake or strength training, become blunted, in other words, less effective. So the exact mechanisms are unclear, but it's thought to involve changes or rather reductions in digestion, the absorption and muscle uptake of amino acids. But the good news is that this anabolic resistance can be overcome by increasing stimulus. So in other words, more targeted strength training and a higher protein intake. So I really just want to underline finally on this slide that sarcopenia is not inevitable. So it's often treated as unavoidable, but it isn't. So resistance training is incredibly powerful. We know from all the research, certainly the consensus of research is that just 2 sessions per week can prevent or even reverse muscle loss. So it particularly protects, the fast twitch muscle fibers. These are the type 1 muscle fibers, so type 2 muscle fibers that decline most with age. And we know that progressive loading improves your strength, power, and joint stability, all of which reduce injury and risk of falls as people get older. So I think one of the most encouraging findings in the research is that it's never too late to start. I love this University of Birmingham study, which showed that older adults who have been sedentary respond just as well to resistance training as those who've been active all their lives. So in this study, they only looked at a single resistance training bout, and that then they measured the participants' muscle protein synthesis, I call it MPS, is quicker. So they found that the MPS increased in both groups, which means that the capacity to build muscle is still there. So really the key message is that it's never too late to start strength training, even if you're in your 70s, even if you're in your 80s. So when we talk about resistance training in terms of muscle building and strength, and of course, sorry, I'll say that a bit again. Now, when we talk about resistance training, it's often in terms of muscle building and strength. And of course, that's true, but for older adults, what really matters goes beyond the aesthetics and beyond performance. So what really matters is what it allows people to do. So it allows people to stay independent. It allows them to, it means that they have reduced inflammation. It can support their immune function and improve glucose control. So in other words, muscle is metabolically active and protective. It's not just about appearance or performance. So let's move on now to how energy needs may or may not change as we get older. So certainly as muscle mass declines, this is without strength training, your resting metabolic rate will fall, and therefore your daily energy needs will decrease. And that's why many people feel that they can't eat the same way they used to. People think that, if they eat anything as they get older, they're going to automatically gain weight, or that they feel that their metabolism has slowed down. But with resistance training, that changes this picture completely. So when you maintain or even increase your muscle mass as you get older, then your metabolic activity stays higher and your energy needs will remain closer to those of younger adults. So it's not aging itself that slows metabolism, it's actually losing muscle. And as I said previously, muscle is metabolically active tissue. So keeping it is really one of the most powerful tools that we have for healthy, successful aging. So let's move on now to protein. So as we get older, our muscles become less sensitive to protein. As we've already mentioned, that anabolic resistance. So that means that older adults need more protein, not less, in order to stimulate this MPS. So for older adults, especially those doing regular strength or endurance exercise, current evidence suggests that aiming for around 1.2 to 1.6 grams of protein per kilogram body weight each day is that's the official recommendation, and that is approximately 1.5 times greater than the lower level. It's actually 1.5 times greater than the RDA. The 1.6 is clearly double the RDA. But this extra protein, it will help support muscle maintenance, recovery, performance. So it's particularly important for overcoming this anabolic resistance. So let's get a bit more practical. So it's also really helpful to think about protein on a per meal basis rather than just over the whole day. So a really good target is around 0.4 grams of protein per kilogram body weight. It's a bit of a mouthful, isn't it, at each meal? So for example, if you weigh 60 kilos, that works out at roughly 24 grams of protein per meal. And then distributing this protein evenly across the day helps to maximize this MPS, and it's particularly important as we get older. So this slide shows that getting enough protein on a plant-based diet is entirely achievable. So there are plenty of options. I've shown on this slide, I've shown you perhaps some of the more sort of protein dense foods, of the more concentrated types of protein. So these are everyday foods. So tofu, tempeh, lentils, edamame, seitan, vegan corn, protein powder. So these are really quite protein dense foods. But the key is eating a variety of foods across your meals to consistently reach that 20 to 30 grams of protein per meal target. And this is a simple example of what that looks like in practice. So this pad thai with crispy tofu and peanuts provides around 31 grams of protein in a single meal. And it uses familiar and everyday plant foods. And it really just goes to show how combining ingredients makes it easy to reach your protein target without needing large portions or specialist products. Okay, let's set another example. Okay, so this is another example. This is a mixed grain salad with tempeh. And this one provides around 30 grams of protein. And so it combines tempeh with a variety of different grains and plenty of vegetables. So it's a simple, balanced meal that supports muscle maintenance, recovery, while it's also delivering fiber, micronutrients, antioxidants, healthy fats. So these are all important nutrients for active adults. And I have got one more example. So this is a great breakfast option. So tofu scramble with whole grain toast. I've added some avocados, tomatoes, spring onions, etc. So this provides around 25 grams of protein, which is right on target for a per meal protein goal in older adults. So starting the day with this sort of meal, it's a decent amount of protein, and obviously this will help to stimulate this muscle protein synthesis earlier on. And it's a really simple way to spread your protein evenly across the day. So at this point, I'll just say that, by the way, these images that I've shown you, these meal examples, they are from the Vegan Athlete's Cookbook. It's a bit of a shameless plug there, but I just thought I'd let you know where they're from in case you were wondering. Um, so it's also worth briefly focusing on leucine. So leucine, it's an essential amino acid. It acts as both a building block for muscle as well as a key trigger for muscle protein synthesis. It's sometimes called an anabolic trigger. So it literally turns on the muscle building machinery, if you like, the whole synthetic process in the cells. So you may hear sometimes this referred to as the leucine threshold. So this is really the amount needed to trigger MPS. And the consensus is that it's roughly 0.7 to 3 grams per meal, depending on the individual. So I know it's quite a wide range, but that's the official recommendation. But this is especially relevant for plant-based diets where, protein quality is often questioned. But of course, with the right food choices, this threshold can easily be met. So I'll show that to you on my next slide. So here are some examples of leucine-rich plant foods. So you'll see edamame. So a lot of soy foods are based. So soy is a really good source of leucine. Soy foods like, edamame, tofu, and tempeh, soy milk, soy yogurt, they're all really useful. And as are oats, actually, they're pretty high in leucine, and chickpeas. So these are amongst the highest sources of leucine. But the key message here is that plant-based diets can provide sufficient leucine. It simply requires a little bit of planning. So it just requires good planning. So it's really just to turn on its head the fact that many people criticize plant-based diets as being inadequate for muscle building because they're low in leucine. But that really leads us on to my next point. So that is that there's still this common belief that plant proteins are inferior for muscle building. And this usually comes from two ideas: that they lack essential amino acids, or that they are poorly absorbed. Lower bioavailability means sort of lower digest, sort of harder to digest, and poor absorption. But in practice, both of those beliefs are untrue. I won't sort of labour the point because I'm sure you've heard other plant-based health professional webinars from the point home, but all plant proteins contain all essential amino acids. It's just that the amount differs from different plant sources. So when we eat a varied plant-based diet, then your amino acid needs are easily met. But bioavailability also is far less of an issue than it's often made out to be, particularly when total protein intake is adequate. And we know the modern digestibility data shows that there really is minimal differences between plant and animal proteins. So the key takeaway really is simple, that plant proteins are not inferior for muscle building. And this brings to mind actually memories of, I had an Ocado delivery about 3, 4 months ago, and some of my shopping started spilling out of the bag. There was, soy milk, soy yogurts, all sorts of, plant-based foods. And the delivery driver said, "Oh, they look really, really healthy. I'm interested in plant-based eating, but unfortunately, I can't eat those foods." So I questioned him. I said, "Well, it's because I'm bodybuilding. I'm trying to gain muscle, so I've got to eat meat." And at that point, I thought, do I give him a lecture for 20 minutes? But I thought better of it. Perhaps I should direct him to the plant-based health professionals seminars next time if I see him. So anyway, let's delve into this in a little bit of detail. So when we look at the evidence, what's clear is that the source of protein doesn't appear to influence muscle or strength gains. This is what I should have told my Ocado delivery driver. So this is quite a landmark meta-analysis. They looked at 15 studies and compared soy with whey protein during resistance training. But they found there was no difference in muscle mass or strength between the two groups. So this is really clear right across the studies. And the conclusion was that when total protein intake was matched, in this case, it is 1.6 grams per kilogram body weight, then muscle and strength gains were the same, regardless of whether that protein came from animal or plant sources. So, in other words, the total amount and distribution matter more than the source. So, provided you're getting to that threshold of 1.6, it doesn't matter where you get your protein from. And this recent study, this was from the Netherlands. It was published, I think, the latter part of last year. This looked at active older adults in their early 70s, so living in the community. They compared a protein-matched vegan diet with an omnivorous diet. So each diet was followed for 10 days in a crossover design. So that means 10 days vegan, then omnivorous, and then vice versa. And then what they found was that they had their muscle protein synthesis measured before and afterwards, but there was no difference in MPS. So in others, no difference in muscle building. So when protein intake is matched, a well-planned vegan diet is just as effective as an omnivorous one for supporting muscle building in older adults. So I can conclude that point. So really, when we step back and look at the broader evidence, randomized controlled trials, systematic reviews, and meta-analyses, they consistently show that well-planned plant-based diets support strength, endurance, and muscle adaptations, which are comparable to omnivorous diets. So let's move on. So yes, so supplements. So there are a few supplements that may offer potential benefits for older active adults. So these include creatine, omega-3s, and vitamin D. But I'm not going to go through all of these. I'm just going to focus on creatine. This is the supplement that I think is getting the most interest at the moment. Excuse me one moment. So what is creatine? Well, it's a naturally occurring substance that you can manufacture inside your body from 3 different amino acids, or you can get it from your diet, mainly from meat and fish. So it's found naturally in animal foods, or you can take it as a supplement. It's commonly sold as creatine monohydrate. But people following plant-based diets will rely entirely on the body's own synthesis of creatine or on supplementation to meet their creatine needs. So we know that supplementation increases muscle creatine stores beyond endogenous levels, in fact, substantially beyond endogenous levels. And it works by enhancing phosphocreatine availability and ATP resynthesis in the cells. In other words, it's very much involved in energy release. And this is the kind of energy that's produced all the time. And all the time we are reliant on this particular energy system. But during fast, explosive exercise, during strength exercise, or any short bursts of exercise, high intensity sets, sprints, and so on, this is the most dominant system. So basically, taking creatine will help to support a higher training quality. So this slide summarizes the benefits of taking, or the potential benefits of taking creatine for older people. But we do know that creatine is one of the most researched supplements out there. I think it was the first three papers were first published in the early 90s. And I remember that because that's when I was writing my first book, actually. And at the time, people saying, oh, this, nobody knows what the long-term side effects might be. And so there was a lot of caution, although Olympic athletes were rumored to be experimenting with it. It was all very new, a bit sort of hush-hush. But since then, so it was 40 years later, it has been proven to be very safe in healthy people. But anyway, summarizing the research, we know that increasing the available amount may result in improved muscle mass, in strength and power, performance, and there is actually, and bone density as well. But what's really quite interesting at the moment is that there is emerging evidence that suggests that it may have cognitive benefits. So in other words, it may benefit brain health, memory, performance under stress, that sort of thing. But the evidence is probably stronger for the physical outcomes at the moment. So although everyone's talking about, the benefits of creatine for brain health, and particularly around the menopause, it's actually been marketed very strongly for menopausal women. At the moment, the evidence is still very early. And I don't think that we can sort of say with huge conviction that it is definitely going to benefit when we don't really know what the right doses would be at the moment. But I will just say, just to sum up, that supplements are relatively inexpensive, relatively safe, and the recommended dosing is about 3 to 5 grams per day. Okay, I'll just give you the results of one meta-analysis. This is a really good summary of kind of where things are at. So this meta-analysis of 10 studies, they looked at 357 adults aged between 57 and 70 during 12 weeks of resistance training. So they compared creatine with training versus training alone. And the results were that creatine plus training led to more lean mass. So between 1 and 1.5 kilograms more lean mass was gained over 12 weeks on average. It also resulted in greater strength and performance gains. So the evidence does seem to be very, very strong when it comes to strength, muscle mass, power, performance. But as I said, at the moment it's a little bit uncertain with brain health. So I'd just like to summarize. So aging does not equate to an inevitable decline. Muscle loss and strength loss, metabolic slowdown, they're largely preventable. So that's all really positive news. Resistance training is essential, and just 2 sessions per week will help to preserve muscle and strength and bone and independence. Protein needs do increase with age, and the recommendation is between 1.2 and 1.6 grams per kilogram per day for active older adults, and that should be evenly distributed around 25 to 30 grams per meal. Plant-based diets fully support performance. So when well planned, vegan diets definitely support muscle strength and recovery just as effectively as omnivorous diets. Muscle is metabolic and protective, so it helps to maintaining. If you can maintain your muscle, you'll support glucose control, blood glucose control, immune health, and longevity. And then taking creatine at doses of about 3 to 5 grams per day may enhance training adaptations in older adults. So I hope that this has given you a few sort of positive indications that aging, that there is such thing as healthy aging. There's a lot of things that are within your control. I think I've probably put forward quite a strong case for the benefits of resistance training in conjunction with a well-planned whole food plant-based diet. So if you'd like more detail, my books cover practical plant-based nutrition, and the plant-based health professionals website has excellent evidence-based fact sheets on protein, key nutrients, and many other topics as well. So I'd just like to thank everyone for listening, and I'm now available for any questions. Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm just waiting for Rohini.
You so much. So I'm hoping everyone can hear me. Happened in 5.5 years, but I'm having trouble. I think it's due to the heavy rain. But I seem to be back on now. Okay, that's great.
Good.
So that was so comprehensive, and I think a fantastic case for why we all need to be incorporating strength training into our workout routines. And so we have a great question. Could you please explain how creatine supplements work? You said that it occurs naturally in animal foods, but also creatine supplements.
Yeah. Oh, sorry. You keep freezing, Rohini. Oh.
Usually vegan. So would love. Oh no.
I'm having trouble. I'm so sorry. I'm having trouble hearing the
Hi everyone.
question because it's kind of breaking up. Let me see if I can find. Is the
Yeah,
question in the chat?
yes, I think that would be great if you could just
I,
go through the chat.
okay, I think I could hear you just then, actually. It was something about how do
Vegan creatine
cre
supplements work because you said that it occurs naturally in
Oh,
animals.
okay. No, creatine supplements are vegan and they're not actually, the supplements are not derived from animal sources. They are simply made from amino acids. That's my understanding anyway. If I am wrong, then um, please somebody correct me. But my understanding is that creatine supplements are automatically vegan. Okay, somebody has asked, is there any difference in types of creatine supplements available? Some clients find they get quite bloated after taking. Yeah, actually interesting. I had a client today who said the exact same thing about bloating. Okay, in terms of creatine supplements, I always advise people just to go for, if you like, your bog standard creatine monohydrate. There are lots of different types available, some bells and whistles attached, but all the research indicates that the monohydrate version is the most effective. You don't need to go off piste with that one. With regards to bloating, that there is a little bit of anecdotal evidence for that, but it tends to occur more with people who are taking higher doses. So although 3 to 5 grams a day is sort of the standard recommendation, sort of for the public, if you like, for people who, non-bodybuilders, sometimes higher doses are recommended up to 20 grams a day for a loading dose for 5 days. So that can definitely lead to bloating anecdotally. So the advice there would really be to cut down your dose and to allow a longer time for loading. Generally, it takes about 30 days to start noticing the difference. But yeah, my advice often, with bloating, like today, my client, I just said to her, just to, reduce the dose, and then if it's still producing negative side effects, then leave it. At the end of the day, creatine is the icing on the cake. It's not essential. It's more important that you're getting a balanced diet, adequate protein, and then creatine is like the tiny little bit of icing.
That's really helpful. And Minal Patel has said that creatine is made using sarcosine and cyanamide in a pressurized reactor. It makes a liquid form, which is then crystallized, dried, and powdered. Not all creatine supplements, most creatine supplements will be marked as vegan. So that's reassuring.
Great. Thank you.
So
Thank
you've
you.
got some fantastic questions, and I seem to have got my connection back. So that's
Good.
great. So for a 30-gram per meal, 30 grams of protein per meal, where a meal is about 500 calories, that's about 25% of calories from protein. What is your understanding of the remaining calories in terms of the proportion of fats and carbohydrates?
Um, so yeah, say if you're trying to devise a diet plan for somebody, then hitting the protein target is probably the most important thing for most people, whether you're active or not. So once your protein needs are taken care of, then in terms that's so in other words, that's your priority. And then in terms of deciding how much carbohydrate you should be consuming, that depends very much upon your activity levels. Essentially, the more active you are, the more intense your activity, then the more carbohydrate you would need. So there are guidelines regarding grams per kilogram per day. So generally for fairly sedentary to moderately active, it's about 3 to 5 grams per kilogram body weight. Those who are doing regular exercise, say an hour of activity per day, a moderate to high intensity activity, you'll be looking at perhaps 5 to 7 grams per day. And really only more serious endurance athletes would be going above 7 grams. And then the balance will be made up of fats, and it goes without saying it should be largely unsaturated rather than saturated fats. So that's the way I would look at diet. I sort of prioritize the protein, the carbs according to activity levels, and then, as long as you ensure that it's not low fat. I'm not an advocate of low fat diet, so I think that it's really important to get those unsaturated fats in. Does that answer the question?
That's perfect. Yeah, and I completely agree. And so many great questions here. So one of the questions that came up was, is there any evidence to support the benefit of increasing protein over 1.6 grams per kilogram a day for active older adults, or do the benefits blunt or level out from this point? Because on your
The,
slide you showed 1.2 to 1.6. So what if someone was going for 2 or 3 grams per kilogram?
Okay, so whilst going up to 2 or more grams of protein, it's unlikely to do you any harm, provided you are healthy, got healthy functioning kidneys. There's been no damaging effects associated with more than you need. Essentially, what happens is that the protein that you don't need, it will be deaminated, which means that the amino part of the molecule, the nitrogen part of the molecule, will be separated off, and then the rest of the protein molecule will be used essentially as a fuel supply, so as a fuel source. But there is little benefit in consuming more than you need. So yeah, the benefits of going above 1.6 really tail off very, very quickly. And in fact, the study that I referred to in the presentation by Rob Morton, 2018, where they said 1.6 was the sort of threshold, that was the cutoff. They found that only a few outliers perhaps needed up to 2.2. So that was the absolute maximum. So it was the minority of the cohort needed that amount of protein. The vast majority of people, their needs will easily be met at 1.6.
Really interesting.
Okay.
you. So
Mhm.
this one is a great one for you. You've obviously been plant-based for a long time, and I think veggie before that, and competed at a national level as well. But are there any benefits of a plant-based diet over an omnivorous diet in terms of muscle building for this area in terms of
Yeah,
strength?
that's a great question because although virtually all the studies to date have looked at, are there any disadvantages of a vegan or plant-based style of eating? And the resounding answer is no, there are no disadvantages. So it's a very good question. Are there advantages? I believe that there are, although there isn't that sort of the definitive scientific proof, but the potential advantages of switching to plant-based for performance reasons. First, these diets tend to be quite rich in carbohydrates. We're talking about whole food, plant-based, quite rich in carbohydrates, which is really good for replenishing or optimizing muscle glycogen stores. The benefits are, sorry, the other benefit is that the diets are quite high in antioxidants. Polyphenols, so antioxidants are really good for reducing um, the reactive oxygen species, so oxidative damage in the muscles that occurs during intense exercise. Um, they're high in polyphenols, which is good for gut health. And in fact, there's been quite a lot of new research over the last 5, 6, 7 years on the benefits of healthy gut microbiome when it comes to performance in terms of recovery and yeah, so performance, recovery, better immunity. So those are all really important for any kind of activity, not just elite athlete performance. So yeah, I think there are plenty of potential benefits of plant-based diets. And if you go from a sort of a standard Western diet to a plant-based diet, that's probably why a lot of athletes say yes, they feel better on a plant-based diet, and therefore their performance improves, their recovery is faster, and immunity tends to improve. So that's largely anecdotal evidence, of course. It's not sort of proven scientific evidence. But yeah, I'm sure most of the listeners today will be testament to the benefits of plant-based eating.
Yeah,
Mm.
definitely. We do have a mix of attendees today, which is always great. And I did want to bring up running. We have a lot of runners, obviously, plant-based diet can be great fuel for running, and it can be quite a big passion within a plant-based or even
Mm.
community. I would love to know your thoughts as the official nutritionist for the London Marathon. Do you feel that people who are running need to incorporate other forms of training in, or do we all need to be running more? What are your thoughts? And is it really about the individual? What's a good rule of thumb, especially for older adults?
Ah, yes, yeah. So it will come as no surprise for you to hear that I am such a strong proponent of strength training, and I think every qualified coach knows that incorporating strength training into your running training plan has got a myriad of benefits. Joint stability, reduced injury risk, improved bone density. So although, running is an impact, it's high impact, but including strength training is really important, for strengthening the muscles, the joints, the bones, um, and improved running technique, improves running efficiency. Ultimately, it will make you into a faster and more efficient runner. And in my experience over the last few decades, actually seeing runners, and you can easily spot older runners who incorporate strength training into their diet, not only look stronger and healthier, but they have got better running longevity. They'll be in their sport longer than those that don't incorporate strength training. So that's the bottom line.
This is really important. We know that plant-based diets are associated with a lower BMI, which is obviously great especially at the population level, where many of us
Mm.
are suffering with overweight and obesity. Do you think that by incorporating the strength training aspects, we can mitigate some of those issues if you are a slightly lower BMI? Say if your BMI is below 23, which I think is sort of that cut off, or that point at which the risk of things like osteopenia and things
Yeah,
go up quite a bit. So would love your thoughts on that.
yeah, definitely. Now, you see so many runners who are, incredibly light, and although there is a relationship between body weight and running speed, but it's not a clear relationship. It's not linear, and although it's a generalized um, relationship, but of course, having a light body weight doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be healthier. It doesn't necessarily mean that you are going to be a a faster runner. It doesn't mean that you'll be in the sport for longer. I think it's really important to realize that the relationship between body weight and then muscle weight in particular um, does have a big impact on, running performance and overall health. Yeah.
Thank you. So I'm going to try and go a bit quick fire with the questions because they're
Okay.
coming in hard and fast. Could you give some examples of strength training exercises? I think so often we talk about strength training or resistance training. Sometimes people even listening to this shouldn't assume that maybe that everyone knows what that is. What would some sort of classic exercises be,
Okay.
and what would you suggest for total newbies to get started?
Yeah, okay. So when we say strength training, it can include weight training. It can mean lifting weights like dumbbells, barbells, etc. It can also mean body weight exercises such as press ups. You can do squats. You can do lunges. Those are all excellent exercises to do. And then core exercise, you do body weight. You can use resistance bands, and so there are various gadgets available. So, and actually, yoga and Pilates is often counted as a form of resistance training because many of the moves actually do require considerable strength. I've actually been doing yoga for many, many years, most of my adult life. I tend to do yoga almost every other day. And I would say that to really do yoga successfully, to be able to do a good, a long and a strong practice, you do need the strength. So I think the two go very much hand in hand. So in terms of good basic exercise, I'm not a strength training coach. I hasten to add, so I won't give anybody a program. But if you're looking for sort of a good basic routine, then you want to be starting with compound movements like deadlifts, um, and including Romanian deadlifts, squats and lunges, and then you want upper body compound movements like chest press, shoulder press, and these can all be done at home with dumbbells. And there's a fantastic trend at the moment for at home exercises. You can use, YouTube videos. There are many apps available that give superb instruction. The app that I personally use, it's the Peloton app. I like it, but there are many other brilliant ones available. And actually, running apps like Runner and Cooper, they have got strength training incorporated into the running programs, and so they give really good instruction for runners on how to incorporate strength moves into their routine.
That's brilliant. I think it makes it so much more accessible. And obviously for people who do want to invest in that, then I think getting someone that you trust and is qualified as a personal trainer, if you want to be able to
Yeah,
kind
good.
of lift those heavier weights that have those benefits and you don't want to injure yourself, that could be a good
Yeah,
sort of develop the confidence in when it comes to these exercises. So that's great. And I think with yoga and Pilates, so many benefits. I suppose after a
yeah,
point, that progressive overload becomes important, kind of
yeah.
increasing the weight. And you do get to a point with yoga and Pilates where there's so many benefits of it for the mind-body connection, the mobility, the other
Absolutely.
but perhaps you need sort of the separate resistance training after a point when if you're not a total newbie, I think, and you're maybe a bit more advanced. So there's so many great questions here. And there's a really interesting point that someone has made about the danger of, they said, is surely the danger of consuming far more protein than necessary is that it fills us up so much that we may not have the appetite to include sufficient fiber, fruit, and vegetables in the diet. What are your thoughts on that within the context, of course, of a plant-based diet?
Um, yes, but I think the diet that you've just described sounds like a fairly extreme diet, but I have come across that amongst bodybuilders. It tends to be amongst people who are consuming an omnivorous diet. So lots of animal proteins, large amounts of steak, etc. They tend to prioritize their meat. And so, yes, of course, there will be less room available to incorporate, the healthy plant-based foods, the cereals, the nuts, seeds, fruit, vegetables, and so on. Um, so yeah, so although I think at the moment, actually, you're right to highlight a trend towards protein. Protein is just absolutely everywhere. It seems to be fortified in every possible type of food, every, UPF type of food. Just, and then people think it's a miracle nutrient. I think people just got fed up talking about fat and carbs, and protein seems to have some kind of health halo. But the truth is that we need some protein. We need enough, we need sufficient amounts that will, optimize muscle preservation or MPS, but we don't need more than that. And the listener was absolutely correct to say that if you're having more than that, it's completely pointless because it could well be displacing other nutritious foods in the diet.
Definitely. And I think within a plant-based diet, that would be highly unusual. There are sources that are, mostly complex carb, but do contain some protein, like lentils and beans, which are examples of getting great amount of fiber, but obviously with protein as well. So definitely include those legumes in your diet as well. And maybe if you're having seitan 3 times a day, then maybe you'd get into trouble. Most people on a plant-based diet are having that balance. So I think that's important. And someone asked this question. I think this is especially useful for those of us who see clients or patients who are trying to manage their weight, and they are looking for they might be on a calorie restricted diet but still keen to hit their protein goals. What would some lower energy, higher protein options be within the context of a plant-based diet? Are there ones that you recommend?
Yeah, I think when people really are trying to create a calorie deficit, by the way, I would always question somebody, why do you want to create a calorie deficit? Anyway, if there really is a sort of health related need for it, I would really direct them to the array of foods that was in one of my slides. So you might remember the high protein foods such as tofu, the soya products, because you're then getting a lot of protein for relatively few calories than you would if, say, you're getting a protein more from pulses or perhaps grains or perhaps nuts. I mean, clearly you would be consuming a lot of calories if you were getting all of your protein from nuts, whereas if you were talking, if you were getting your protein from, say, tofu, from soy yogurt, then you've got quite a relatively compact source of protein, but not much carbs, not much fat there at the same time. So I'd really emphasize, the soy-based proteins.
And then there's a sort of theme in some of the questions around longevity. I think this is, the last questions we'll be able to get to, because I am conscious that the Traitors starts at 8 and it's a
yes.
show that some of you will want to watch. But the questions around longevity and things like the Mediterranean diet or lower protein diets associated with longevity, sort of the work of Dr. Boltalongo, or kind of this sort of train of thought. What is your view about this? Because sometimes it can feel a bit confusing to make sense of what we should do.
Yes, it is. It is quite confusing. I think the work around Walter Longo talks about, where he's proposing a lower protein intake. That doesn't really apply to physically active individuals, I would say. He might argue differently, but there is so much sound and consistent research that indicates that we do need a certain amount of protein to preserve muscle mass. And we certainly know that as we get older, anabolic resistance develops, and muscle loss can accelerate as we get older, unless we take measures to put that anabolic stimulus back. So protein is one of them. So I'd say strength training and activity is number one by far, by a long shot. But number two is consuming enough protein. So we still need enough. And then we can only look at what goes on in the research with, in respect to muscle and strength, metabolic health. And I think that's all tied up with longevity as well. So I don't think the two views are necessarily opposing, but it can sound confusing though for a lot of people. But I'm hoping that there will be more research that looks at both the benefits of an adequate protein intake as well as a diet for longevity.
Yeah, completely agree. And I think that it does look, promising. I think for the first time, lifespan we know is increasing, but health span is decreasing. So we
Exactly.
want to be active, we want to be able to, be able to climb the stairs and things like that. So I think it's yeah, that's something to look at as well, the health span and the activity levels and all of those things that you've
Yeah.
pointed out. And so many other great questions. I'm really sorry we won't be able to answer all of them, especially the individual health questions, because it's just wouldn't be the right place without that context and the nuance. And some people ask to know more about plant-based diets or maybe about some of the micronutrients to pay attention to. There is so much information on Plant-Based Health Professionals UK. I'd say 95% of it is totally free of charge. And obviously Anita's books as well. I think Dr. Minal Patel shouted out your the
Oh.
your other book, the
Thank you.
sports. It's the
Oh, the complete guide to sports nutrition. Thank you. I'm very, very grateful for you
I put the link to
for
the
the
other books,
plug.
but they're on Amazon. Please do go and follow Anita on Instagram. And if you buy the Waitrose magazine, then you often are contributing there as well. And you can keep up to date with all of her work. But definitely, please do support the books. You can check out our fact sheets, our 21-day challenge, all of our other resources, because of course this just scratched the surface into there are so many aspects of plant-based diets. This is a really important to get the message out that you can be healthy, live long, live strong on a plant-based diet at any age. So thank you again for joining us, and I hope you all have a lovely evening. And thank you so much, Anita, for illuminating us on this topic, because I think it's one where myths abound, and you really clarified so many points for me, and I think for everyone else. Lots of lovely comments coming into the chat.
Thank you. Thank you. Oh, that's very much appreciated, I must say. And thank you so much for inviting me back again. Really appreciate the opportunity. And it's just lovely to know that it's a topic of such great interest. It's really an honor to be able to contribute to the debate. Thanks very much, Rohini.
Already lots of people saying they're using their resistance brands and they're going to be incorporating more strength training and encouraging their patients as well. So that's really, really lovely to hear. And see you at the next webinar, everyone. Thanks a
Thank you
lot.
very
Good night.
Okay. Bye, everyone.